about, or you can post your thoughts in the G Plus event or the YouTube comments, and producer Dan is going to read those out for you if you're too shy to join us live on the Telebox. While we give folks a chance to get their thoughts together and join us on the Hangouts, I'm going to cover a few points that have already been raised by some of our developer audience on the Google Plus page. Those of you who have joined us on the Hangout, thank you for joining us. We'll get Daniel in touch with you via text on that so that we can queue you up and get you ready to share your thoughts. So, let's see.
Sorry about that. I cut out the first 10 seconds of your intro, so the welcome and, if you're watching, please be patient, all that stuff. Sorry about that.
That's all right, not a problem. So yeah, so just so everyone knows, this is after the table flip, talk radio style chance for everyone else to tell me how right I was or how wrong I was. I somehow suspect we'll get more of the latter than the former, just because if you agree, then there's not a lot to say. So we're going to get some folks on Hangout as well. I'm going to start off by answering some of the questions from people on the G Plus event and the YouTube live stream. So if you do have questions and you prefer not to be on video, do throw them in there and producer Dan will respond on your behalf. So on G Plus, developer Jacob Nordfolk represented probably the most common argument against what I was presenting in today's table flip, and that is that there's a lot of user pressure or dissatisfaction because users, quote, don't know how to quit the program. And I think I covered sort of the argument against that pretty well, but let's be a little bit more specific in two examples. So in Jacob's case, he's talking about two internet radio apps that he has built. And in his experience, users have failed to find the stop button to stop the music. Now he's pointed out that in his particular use case, he's not allowed to make the stop button more prominent, and so this is a genuine problem. So what I would say is have a look at the way that Google Music actually solves this. And so really it's about making sure that stopping the music, stopping the resource consumption is really, really easy to find. So Google Music does this by having the stop controls along the bottom of every activity whenever the app is running, or if the app isn't running but the music is playing, then there's an ongoing notification which has rich notifications as well, which again allows you to stop the music. And in addition to that, there's also the lock screen, which you can then configure and which Google Music does to allow you to stop playback as well. And so the solution here, particularly for music playing apps, is that all of those things I've just described are totally available to any third-party app. And so by doing things like this, it makes it really, really easy. Even if the stop button doesn't have to be half the screen, it's just everywhere they look, there's a really obvious place to find it. And that's going to be much more reliable than having an exit button, which a lot of users aren't going to find anyway. User demands for an exit button almost always correlate to an app that has confusing navigation or hard to find controls or is a resource hog. So adding an exit button is going to stop users from asking you to add an exit button, but it's kind of like giving an aspirin to a patient complaining of chronic abdominal pains. They will stop asking for the painkillers, but it doesn't actually get rid of their problem. So you're better off trying to treat the underlying cause rather than the symptom. And similarly, Daniel Dero asks, how would you implement the browser feature of ditching all cookies on exit if you don't have an exit button? And that's actually a really good question. In practice, I think there's an assumption that mobile devices are inherently more personal than computers. So privacy features like this sort of exit, remove all cookies when you exit, which were really designed around ensuring that credentials used by different users on the same computer don't leak when your wife, girlfriend, husband, whoever uses your computer. So those sorts of features aren't quite as important for a phone where the implicit assumption is that there's only going to be one person using it. And in fact, it even almost goes the other way, where the pain associated with having to put in your credentials or enter the same information multiple times is actually significantly more annoying on a phone than it is on a computer. So there's sort of even more reason to hang on to some of this stuff. So that said, if you did want to do something like that, the suggestion I would have is probably to have a menu option, or probably a settings option to clear all cookies. Or better still, maybe a menu item which says something like close all windows and clear all cookies, or it just says close all windows and clear all cookies is one of the options that you have. So that's answer to two of those questions. What should we go to next, Dan? Have we got folks on the Hangout which would like to vent their spleen?
We don't have anyone explicitly asking for time on camera, but if any of you guys in the Hangout right now want to comment, we can definitely put you on air, so just let us know.
I think we should put people on the spot. If they're joining the Hangout, we're going to assume that they've got something to say. So pick someone who looks like they're enjoying themselves. The guy in the red shirt. Let's pop him online and see what he's got to share with us all.
All right, the guy in the red shirt would be Jay Miguel. I'm not going to say his whole name.
He can introduce himself. You want to pop him up on the screen and
right.
And let him know and unmute him, because I suspect he's muted.
All right.
I think he's still muted.
Hey, how you doing? Can you hear us?
We can't hear him. Have you got...
Here we go.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay.
So what do you think? Am I full of it, or am I onto something?
No, you're absolutely right. And I was just curious if there are any other options. I mean, are there people that think that the exit button makes any sense?
There are a surprisingly large number of people which disagree with the basic premise. I think it's usually around users. That seems to be the feedback I get from most developers, is that they're like, yeah, we don't want to do it, but our users keep asking for them. And so I think a big part of it is trying to explain, and a lot of the time what they're saying is, well, that's fine, but you need to explain to users why they don't need an exit button. But what I've actually found is that it's easy to explain to developers how to build apps that people aren't asking for those exit buttons. Because that kind of tends to be the most common thing. They're like, I didn't want to do it, but people kept asking for it, so I had to build it in. So it's really about trying to explain to devs how you can build apps which don't have people asking those questions.
Yeah, but in the end, if the client does ask for it, that's it, right? They're paying for it, they get it.
Absolutely. No, and of course, I guess that's the other, the other case which I haven't really talked much about is what happens when you're building an app for someone and they say, we want an exit button. Well, you have to do what the client says. But really, it's about trying to create an atmosphere where people feel comfortable at least telling their clients that, this is an anti-pattern, this is not what Android users are going to expect, and being able to, say that with some authority. And that's a big part of what the design guidelines on developer.android.com/design are really about, is helping to create sort of an expectation of this is what Android apps are. So if you're asking for something different, then it's counter to what people are going to be expecting. And I think there's a lot of sort of background which we have to get past, of people being used to old feature phone J2ME apps which have an exit button because they were sort of single tasking, or even iPhone, which uses a slightly different model for the way that they do things. And so a lot of it is sort of education, both for developers and users and clients, which seem to somehow fit in between. So it's interesting.
Cool. Anyone else in the Hangout? I'm going to put you guys on the spot and just select someone at random if no one volunteers.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, I guess, real quick before I had to head out.
Hey, Ryan.
How you doing?
Good, mate.
All right, Ryan, you're go ahead. You're live.
Cool. So I just want to agree with Rito with the whole activity lifecycle thing. A lot of people say that you need that exit button to exit that app and get it out of their mind. I guess a lot of people probably just don't fully understand that life cycle, where it goes in the background, stays in the background for a little bit, and then you have to adjust for that whole life cycle pattern of going through on pause and then on stop, and making sure you clear up the things that you're appropriately doing with your app in those life cycles.
Yeah, I think the lifecycle stuff it's kind of the most fundamental thing about Android, which makes it really different to anything I've ever done before. I was a Windows programmer before Android, and you're not really thinking in those sorts of terms of the OS telling you what's happening to your app. Like, you capture some of those things like on form leave and on control focus and stuff, but it's never to control your resource usage. It's just to decide whether your app should be doing something. So I always think that's kind of the big challenge. Once you really get the lifecycle stuff in your head, everything else just kind of makes sense and kind of follows. Is that kind of similar to your experience?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree in that aspect. A lot of people probably don't see that. Us being developers, you know that life cycle. You know it's happening in the background, what is supposed to happen. Maybe the users probably just don't see that right in the foreground of, there's a life cycle going on, this is what needs to happen, and so maybe they're feeling like there should be an exit button, when in reality, you really don't need one. So you're definitely not crazy. I see where you're coming from. So I just want to let you know that.
Cool, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Do we have any other questions on either the live stream or on G Plus or YouTube? Oh, someone's got his hand up in the.
All right, yeah, let's put him on. This is Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Go ahead, Dave. You're live.
Hi. Yeah, I just want a quick comment about what the previous speaker said. I think, it's going to take a little while for people to get used to that. I think we're so, even a few years ago, or a couple years ago, maybe with Vista or something like that, we're so used to closing down stuff and making sure RAM is available and all that stuff that we need to really get used to knowing that if an app is done properly, sitting in the background, not consuming resources, not pinging the server and so on and so forth, I think that's really going to take a couple of years before people understand and are aware of that and are comfortable just leaving apps open, just by hitting the back button and back to the home screen. So.
No, absolutely. I think there's a big challenge there for us as developers as well. It's making sure that users feel really comfortable doing that, and that, I mean, this is the thing. If you have a whole bunch of apps and then you go back to the home screen and your device starts running real slow, that's a terrible experience. It's no wonder that users are then going to be like, I just want to know how to exit all of these apps. And so I think the framework team here at Google have done a lot of work in that direction to try and make the blame more visible. So things like battery drain and those sorts of things, you can see which apps are doing it. And so the blame goes to them rather than to the system. And if you're doing these things right, if you're suspending all of your listeners, turning off your updates, not doing background refreshes or any of that stuff, then your app will never get blamed for anything, and no one's ever going to, call it into question as to how can I get rid of this, because it's just there and it just works. But yeah, I think that's the challenge. You got to reach that critical mass where most apps are doing the right thing, and then users are going to be like, why would I exit it? That's just going to slow stuff down.
Cool. So, Ali, hey, I noticed that you have a question in the chat. Do you want to ask Rado live? You're on air.
I just asked what I could do to. I'm actually just starting to develop and whatnot. So I wanted to know, are there any resources that you can actually provide or that Google provides about learning more about the life cycle?
Absolutely. So I posted a link. So links to all of the stuff that I showed in the sort of the intro video there on the YouTube site. I'll post it into G Plus event as well. But to answer your question more specifically, if you go to developer.android.com/training, we have a bunch of sort of intro level classes to help really sort of explain the basic building blocks of Android. And I think the lifecycle stuff is lesson 1. It's kind of that fundamental. So if you want to sort of get a better understanding of what it means, how does it work, what's the right way of dealing with it, then yeah, definitely check that out, and that should help you get started.
Thank you.
No worries, and good luck with everything, man. It should be a lot of fun. We look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Thanks.
All right, guys, who's up next? Well, just go ahead and raise your hand on the Hangout, and I'll put you guys live. Anyone? All right, here we go. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, Yossi, nice.
Yossi.
You've even used a lot of
nice.
words from,
Awesome.
from Google Plus. Nicely done, man. How you doing?
I
think you muted yourself.
Yeah. Still nothing. Why don't you go ahead and check your mic and still nothing.
No, we're not hearing you, unfortunately, Yossi.
All right, why don't we move on to someone else? Anyone else?
Hey. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
We hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. A couple of mics over here, so I needed to choose the correct one.
We have the same problem.
First of all, hi Rito. I don't know if you remember me from the Google I/O.
Oh, vaguely. I meet a lot of people at I/O.
Yeah, I know. Basically, what I wanted to refer to was the exit button. In our app, Ubu is a video social communication, chat and IM messaging and so on. And basically, we have users wanting to exit the application in fully,
not just doing a sign out and leaving the service running or something like that, or killing the. Basically, they want to exit the application, so our service will die at the same point they want. So I'm referring to it as a bad pattern because that's more like a single task device and not the Android system. But basically, if we need to implement such a behavior, then the exit button should be a part of the Android pattern, although the Android system is killing tasks by itself.
I think the challenge in a situation like that is sort of similar to what you're going to see in things like Google Talk or any ongoing messaging thing where the user wants the ability to basically say disconnect from your server and stop consuming everything. So in that case, a combination of sort of hitting log out or sign out from the service and then and listening for on pause should be enough. So that once they say disconnect, that should be the equivalent of hitting exit, basically.
Yeah, that's what we implemented. We have both features. We have the feature sign out, so we'll show the user the home screen to log in via Facebook or his username and password, and we also have the exit button that keeps the user logged into the system, but basically exits all the applications and kills the service and everything. And then all messaging or notifications comes via GCM or T2DM to all the devices.
So that's interesting, and actually that brings up a really good point, and kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Like, if you hadn't told me that, if I just opened your app and saw log out and exit as two separate options, I would have no idea what the exit button would do. I certainly wouldn't expect that if I hit exit that I still get messages from GCM. I would expect that if you hit exit, everything turns off, so I log out and I stop getting messages. And I think that's the challenge, right? If you introduce something like exit, which doesn't have a clear semantic meaning, then different users are going to interpret it in different ways. And so, like, log out totally makes sense. Disconnect me from your services. I don't want to get any more messages. 100% makes sense. Exit, it doesn't. Like, basically what you're describing is what the exit button does. Sounds to me like what should happen when I hit back or home from within your app. It should just
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But because we're doing cross-platform, so we want our users to know that the device or application handles the same situations all over the platforms. So basically, if you have an exit button on iPhone, or you have an exit button on Windows, or on Windows Phone tablets and so on, or even on Mac, you press Command Q, you exit the app. And on Android, the ecosystem is just hit the home button and let Android deal with all the memory and all the tasks ongoing and so on. So what is the best option to handle the situation for us, and also give the user the same atmosphere or the same experience when moving from device to device? Because basically the user can connect from an iPod, an iPhone, an iPad, Nexus 7, Nexus 10, Google TV, you name the device, we have it. So basically we want the user to know that ooVoo connects people all over the world, no matter what, the same experience, the same features are available on all devices. Okay. So that's the main issue here.
That's yeah, no, that's okay. So that's a good question, and it's actually an interesting one, because I sort of hear this a lot from developers who are building sort of these cross-platform solutions, where they want to have something really consistent across all of the different devices. Now, the thing is, there's sort of two different ways that I would approach this, and the first is that it's actually fairly unlikely that you're going to have a significant number of users which have multiple different devices from different manufacturers. So, you know, you're not going to have a lot of people which have an iPhone and an Android phone. There will be some, and this leads me to my second point, which is that people expect their devices to behave consistently. They don't necessarily expect apps to work exactly the same across different devices. So If I've got an iPad, then I expect all of the apps to work in a way that's consistent with the way all of the other iPad apps work. And if I had Android, then I expect them to all work with Android. So what you don't have is an iPhone user expecting their Android phone to work in the same way as their iPhone, because it's a different device, right? They don't have the same expectations. If they did, they get really confused when they started using things like Mail and Maps and music and Twitter and everything else, because they just inherently behave differently. And it's the same with computers. You know, you expect your computer to work in a certain way. You expect to have that Command Q to get out of an app in Mac. If you've got Windows, you expect to be able to hit Alt F4. But you know what you're not expecting is, a good example is if you're building an app for both Windows and Mac, you're not going to build the Command Q shortcut into the Windows app so that people who are using it on Mac understand how to quit. You're going to build in the same sort of user patterns that they're expecting for Windows, and it's the same across mobile. Like, I wouldn't tell you to build your iPhone apps so that they work and look the same as your Android apps. You want to have a consistent experience between the platform, because that's what they're doing within a given context. So, for your app in particular, what you want to do, what your users are going to expect, is that if you're signed in, but your app is not in the foreground, then it shouldn't be consuming any resources. And that's just going to be their expectation. Some may look to find an exit button, but if you're not doing anything, if you're not consuming any resources, if the phone's not going slower, if you're not doing background polling, you're not waking up the phone, you're just receiving those updates using Google Cloud Messaging, then they're going to be happy. They're not going to be looking for something if there's no reason to look for it. So that would be my big piece of advice: is don't try to over-simplify across devices, because that, in my experience, that tends to be what CEOs do. Because they look at all of your apps across all of the different phones and go,
yeah, that's our issue here, because the designers or product guys basically want the same features to be on all devices. Yeah. And my main concern, or my main issue as an Android developer, is to show them that the Android system is not the same as the iOS system, or is not the same. So you have the basic conventions in Android, such as the home key or the not showing the exit option. I'm with you. I agree that you don't need an exit button on your application, but basically I want you to say it so I can have a verdict or a judge overruling on the matter, so I can show it to our designers and let them know that basically what they're doing is not native to Android.
Sure, and that's the sort of thing which we're trying to do a lot more of these days. I think the thing about Android, particularly when we got started, is that it's like, it's open, you can do anything. But now we're trying to get to the point where it's like, you can do anything, but we'd really like people to do things in a consistent way to make it easier for users. And so we're trying to become a little bit more aggressive about telling people what are the best practices. You don't have to follow them. No one's going to take your app out of Google Play if you do things differently. But at least something you can show your design team and your management team and say, look, this is the way that things work on Android. And if you want to do it differently, you're going to have to come up with something very different. Oh, I see what's happened here.
I think your keynote.
Yeah, so let me just jump over here and I'll fix that problem. Keynote. Wonderful. Boom. Yeah, so that's. It sounds like you're on the same page as me. So it sounds like we're in good shape. But yeah, that's the challenge, is explaining to other people exactly why that's the case, and hopefully you can share with them some of the stuff that we talked about today, and that may help change their minds. Thanks for your time, Yossi. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and put Luke on. Luke has a quick question for you.
Cool. Hey, Luke.
Hey, I was just wondering about something that I've seen that's similar to what you're talking about, but not exactly the same, where when someone hits the back button from an application.
Love it. Hangouts.
Hangouts, doing us a favor.
Yeah, 1 second, guys.
We'll be right back. Love the technology around here. It never screws us over.
Yep.
So while we're waiting for Luke to come back, cool. I think you're back. All right, so we missed some of that because our Hangout crashed, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that sentence finished with you hit a back button that says, "Are you sure you want to exit?"
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I hate that too. That makes me very, very angry. There are very few exceptions to that rule. So navigation is actually a good one, where if I hit the back button on Google Navigation, it says, do you want to end all route guidance? And then you can either say yes or no. And that's reasonable, because I think it still exits it still backs out of the app. It just either does or doesn't turn off the ongoing service. And that's because if I accidentally hit back while I'm driving, I don't want to then have to faff around with maps and navigation to try and get it back up. So I like that, where it's sort of a disruptive, distracting behavior. But if it's just a normal app that's like, it shouldn't be a difference, right? For most apps, if they don't have an ongoing service, hitting back and then going, oh, whoops, and then starting it again, it should be the same as starting it from scratch or hitting home and going back. So yeah, that's definitely an anti-pattern that I really hope dies a death.
Okay, that's kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah, nothing too controversial there.
No.
Thanks for bringing it up. Okay, we got another hand wave. I think fourth from the left.
Is that you again, Dave?
I think so.
All right.
I don't think that's it again. Hey,
No,
Dave.
that was just my son waving.
Excellent. Say hi to your son.
Yeah.
All right, who's up next? Unfortunately, since the Hangout crashed, I lost some of the comments. So if you guys were interested in joining in live, just let me know. Wave your hand. I'll put you guys on air.
Do we have any comments on G Plus or on YouTube, which may require some responding?
There are actually a lot of great comments. I'm actually having a hard time picking a good one. They all seem to be replying to each other about this very debatable topic.
Oh, okay, excellent.
So let me go ahead and look through a couple of them real quick and pick a great one for you. I did see one down here a little bit. Let me scroll down.
So while Daniel's looking that up, I just want to as well point out to you guys that I'm going to try and do this semi-regularly. So if there are particular topics which make you want to flip a table, let me know on G+, Twitter, wherever you like, and I'll see if I can put together some argument. Yes, Dave?
I actually have a quick question. Maybe we all have the same question. Are you going to flip that table before you leave?
I was thinking about it, but my laptop is on it, so I'm gonna choose not to, and maybe save that up for next week. I will also take suggestions on different kinds of tables. I know that there was some people who were disappointed that I used a table which had like a cylindrical bottom rather than a more traditional four-legged table, which the the emoticon would seem to require. But it's a learning experience. It's iterate and launch early and iterate often. So that's what we're going to do here at Table Flip as well. I'd really love to hear what are some of the things that drive you guys crazy. And as Jocelyn was sort of suggesting earlier, like I think a lot of the time we as developers all know how we think apps should work, and we get overruled by designers or PMs which perhaps aren't as familiar with Android as we are. So if you're looking for a way to be able to present a justification, then do let me know, and perhaps a 6-minute video will help. I don't know how much so, but it's probably worth a try. Let's see. Did you find a good question or comment for us to
I
respond
found
to?
a simple one, which is not too far beyond my understanding. It's about debouncing the back button. For example, if you're hitting back multiple times quickly, try to escape of an app, which most users tend to do.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take you back a lot further than you intended to. So, what are your thoughts on giving some feedback to users when they're hitting back in a short amount of time?
So I think I'm going to answer that question by answering a slightly different question, which is really about navigation. And I think that's another vector into which people are like, I want an exit button because otherwise I'm in a browser or in an app and I have to hit exit like a million times before I get out of the app. If that's happening, that tells me that the navigation of your app is probably overly complex. It shouldn't require sort of 15, 20 back button hits to get back to the home screen of your app. So whether that's using the up affordance or using a logo click to take you back to the main screen of your app, you really want to be able to make it easy for users to navigate, particularly on phones and I think still on tablets. You really don't want to force your users down a rabbit hole of navigation. You want to keep it as simple as possible. So rather than figuring out how do I deal with the fact that a user may hit the back button 7 times instead of 6 times to get to the home screen, think about how to make it easier for your user to get to the home screen to begin with. I think that's probably a better way to invest your time than figuring out how to debounce too many back button clicks.
Cool. So we've got another good comment from Paul W. here. He says that users traditionally have grown up being taught what the exit button does throughout their entire lives. And so, you know, you're on Windows or you're on some other operating system, and you know, everyone kind of feels familiar with the exit button.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of, you know, part of the foundation of how we do things already.
Yes.
So maybe he's sort of disagreeing with you.
No, I'll take that. I mean, I think that's what I was kind of talking about right at the beginning. So you may have missed the start, and we'll have just the video of the rant posted. And in fact, there's a link to it in the G+ stream if you did miss the very beginning. But it's a good point, right? Like old school, exit meant something. Like if you have a single tasking operating system, you need to have an exit in order to be able to do something else. And so yeah, users have gotten used to it, particularly us. Like I'm guessing that people watching this have been using computers since shortly after exiting the womb. And so those sort of patterns really get ingrained with us. But new users, you know, they're not thinking of it that way, particularly phone users who don't really think of their phone as being a computer that runs apps. They just think of it as a device that lets them do stuff. You know, I remember reading a survey, I think it was late last year or early this year, which asked people, do you use the internet on your phone? And most said no, I don't use the internet on my phone. And then the follow-up question is like, well, do you check your email? Do you update Facebook? Do you use Twitter? And they're like, yeah, definitely do all of those things. And it's like, the internet, how does it work? You know, that's what's making all of these things work, but people don't think of it that way. They've completely, you know, all of the implementation details about how these apps work, the fact that they're apps running on a multitasking operating system connecting to the internet over an Ethernet or cell network TCP/IP connection, they don't know any of that. They don't care about any of that. They just want to do something like order a taxi or check their email or update Twitter or take a photo. And how it all works means nothing to them. And so in that context, exit doesn't make any sense. Like I just want to update Twitter and then I want to take a photo. I don't want to have to think about exiting one app to start up another. So it's really about changing those paradigms and getting people thinking in a different way, so that, I mean, you can say anything is old school. Like, you know, I remember when I was in high school thinking, oh, I can't believe it, man, this new computer I'm going to buy doesn't have a 5 1/4 inch disc. That's ridiculous. I mean, I know I mainly use the 3.5 inch floppies now, but the 5 1/4 is never going away. Yeah, it went away. And then the 3.5 inch went away not too long afterwards. And then hard drives started to end up in the terabytes. But, you know, my point is that things change. And I think as developers, we need to adapt to that. And the trend is really to try and make things easier and easier for users, so they don't have to think about how do I use a computer. They just do stuff, and then the OS does all the hard work. You know, it's the same when we started switching to garbage collected programming languages. Like a lot of folks back in the day were like, oh, that's ridiculous, you don't have to manage your own memory. But you know what, it's easier, it makes our job easier, and let's just focus on features rather than on, you know, the bits and pieces that go into making an app work. I think we're just about out of time. We've already gone 15 minutes later than I initially proposed, but we've had a lot of good comments and conversations, so I didn't want to cut anyone off. But is there anyone on the Hangouts which would like to throw in a few final thoughts, comments, disagreements? You could just speak up and we'll pop you on.
Just saying thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I had a question, and I was wondering if we could do a session on unit testing.
Okay, yeah, unit testing is a good one. I think testing is something which we probably don't have as much information out there for Android as we should do, considering how important it is. So yeah, we'll definitely feed that back into the team and see if we can get like you know, an office hours hangout or something around unit testing, best practices, those sorts of things. It's a great idea.
Cool, and I think that's it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Let's see. Yeah, so that's it for today. I'll be back next time for another Android anti-pattern that makes me want to flip a table. I don't know what it is yet, so if you've got suggestions, let me know and I will throw the furniture on your behalf. Until then, my name is Redo Meyer. We were ably assisted by Daniel Pham, and thank you for watching.